Welcome to the Bariatric Nutrition Coach Podcast, where we empower you with weight loss surgery, nutrition knowledge, mindset advice, and inspiration so you succeed in your weight and health journey. I'm your host, Jane Stoltz, and I am a bariatric dietitian who has helped over 1,300 people on their weight loss surgery journeys. I'm also a solo mum, lover of long walks while listening to podcasts, partial to a glass of wine, and the ocean is my happy place. Join me as I dive deep into bariatric nutrition and lifestyle topics and deliver them to you in bite-sized, palatable episodes every Monday. Now let's go. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Bariatric Nutrition Coach Podcast. And this week I wanted to talk all about common challenges that come up for people in the early days after their bariatric surgery. So straight away you might be saying, Jane, what do you mean by the early days? How long are we talking? And I know many people might think, well, the early days are the first kind of 2 months, 3 months after surgery, but I really see it up to that kind of roughly 12-month mark, because there is so much change and so many challenges that can come up for people in those first 12 months. And today's episode's all about talking about common challenges and really normalizing them. And what I mean by normalizing them is really talk about how normal, common they are. So if you're experiencing any of these challenges, you're not alone. For many years, I had my business based in a very busy bariatric centre, and I would see 8 to 10 clients, patients a day that were pre-surgery or post-surgery. And people would come in and they would start by saying, Jane, I don't know if this is normal, but... And I'd straight away say, if you're experiencing it, it's normal. Is everyone going to experience the challenges that I'm going to talk about today? No, but many people listening, you will relate, and they are very common. And I think it's really important for us to talk about them, normalize them, because we don't want to go down the pathway of thinking it's just you, or it's just me, and feeling isolated and feeling something is not going how it should be going in your journey. So talking about challenges, I think, is really important. But before we launch into this episode, I wanted to give a shout out to the person that left my first review, and it was in Apple Podcasts. And I wanted to read the review and give a shout out to her. And I also do chat with her sometimes in Instagram, so I know who it is. In the Apple Podcast, she's CB0766. And she's written, ever since I stumbled onto Jane's socials, her advice just resonates and clicks. There's no judgment, no feeling of OMG. Here's another person asking the same question. She makes you feel heard. And I, for one, will definitely be listening. So thank you so much for those lovely words. It really makes a huge difference for me sitting in my office, recording podcasts, knowing that people are listening. And I really love reviews and I love getting feedback. So I wanted to ask, if you find value in my podcasts and if you feel others would too, I would love you to share my podcast. And you can do this really easily in, say, Spotify or Google. Not Google. Yeah, I think you probably can in Google as well, but in Apple Podcasts. If you look up the top, you see 3 dots. And if you click that, there's an opportunity to push share podcast. And you can share it to your socials and you can share it to people individually. And if you share it to socials, tag me and I will give you a shout out in my podcasts and say a personal thank you to you, because I really appreciate people sharing my podcast, because I don't advertise my podcast. That's how people are finding this podcast, either by people recommending it. I do actually put it on my Instagram, but I don't do any formal advertising. People actually find me by searching through Spotify, Google, or Apple Podcasts. I'd love you to give me a shout out, tag me, and I will give you a shout out in my podcast. So thank you. Okay, let's dive into the episode. So I have a list of common challenges that people face in those early days after their bariatric surgery, and I'm going to go through them one at a time in no particular order. So the first one is low appetite and thirst. And yes, it is part of the tool of the surgery, but I'm going to explain why it is a challenge. It's a welcome relief for many people to have a drop in their appetite, to not be thinking about food so much. It's lovely, it's a relief, it's respite, and it's what they are looking for, part of the wonderful benefits of having surgery. And particularly in those early days when the surgery is really working, the tool of surgery is working, your hunger hormones, they drop. You don't feel that level of appetite, hunger. Some people it drops quite low. Other people, they say they just don't feel hungry. And also they don't have that desire, that same desire to drink fluid. So they don't have that thirst reminding them and driving them to drink fluid. So you may be thinking, well, Jane, is this a challenge? Well, actually, in the early days after having weight loss surgery, it is a challenge because we still need to reach adequate protein intake, adequate calories, and adequate fluid. So it can be very challenging for many people to reach their protein and fluid goals if they have a significant drop in their appetite and thirst, and they are listening to those cues or the lack of cues to guide them on when to eat and when to drink. So that is a challenge that I work with clients on from week 3 after having their weight loss surgery. It's how to get in adequate protein and adequate fluid in a way that's comfortable for them when their appetite is so low and their thirst is so low. And it's so important because if you have listened to other podcasts I've done and other things I do in social media, eating too little protein, eating too little calories, and obviously not drinking enough fluid is not going to set you up for success after weight loss surgery. And many people think this is wonderful. The less I eat, the better. And it doesn't work that way. You still need to eat a certain amount of protein per day, get adequate calories and adequate fluid to feel good, to be able to live your life and feel really great, but also to optimize your diet so your body feels relaxed and is happy to lose your adipose tissue. So this is a challenge to overcome in those early to medium days. In the longer term, people get more appetite back and it's a lot easier to reach protein and fluid goals. It can still be for many people in the long run challenging to reach fluid goals. And also, what adds to this is the protein foods that we want you to eat in those early to medium days. The lean proteins, high protein foods are actually also the foods that get you satisfied in a very small amount. So we're asking you to eat small amounts of food that get you satisfied very quickly, and it can be a challenge to really get that structure into your diet and get regular meals and comfortably reach your protein goals when you've got such a low appetite and such a low desire to drink. So the next common challenge that I wanted to talk about is nausea. And for most people, this is something that happens in the very early days after having their weight loss surgery, in the first few days, even first few weeks. Many people are sent home from hospital with medication to manage nausea, and it's very normal. And what is also normal but less common is when nausea does continue for some time. And this is definitely a challenge for the people that do experience this. So if you have nausea for a couple of days after surgery, that needs to be managed because we are looking for you to reach and build up your fluid intake, even from those early days after having surgery, and using medication as needed and making adjustments in your diet, even in those very short days or even longer term for several months, to manage your nausea and reach your fluid and protein goals, even in spite of your nausea. So nausea doesn't get talked about a lot after weight loss surgery. It is more common for it to be in that first few weeks, but it can definitely carry on for many people. And if this is something you are experiencing, this longer term nausea, please make sure you're reaching out to your bariatric centre or your primary care provider for support, because you will need that medical support to help you manage your nausea to allow you to reach your protein and fluid goals. Another common challenge that people can experience after having bariatric surgery are taste changes, and it comes as a surprise to many people, where before surgery they may have really enjoyed a food, it was a common food in their diet, and post-surgery it just doesn't taste the same. They don't like the taste, they don't enjoy it. Or on the other hand, pre-surgery they didn't enjoy food, it wasn't something that they reached for, it wasn't part of their diet, and they taste some of that food after having surgery, really enjoy it, and becomes more of a regular food in their diet. So it's really great to be open to taste changes after having weight loss surgery. They can definitely subside in time, and what I mean by that is if you are in the early days after your surgery and a food is tasting quite different, later on down the track it doesn't mean that it won't come back into your diet and you won't enjoy it again. But also to be open to trying new foods, maybe trying foods that you didn't have in your diet before surgery. And a common one and a good example is cottage cheese. Many people before surgery didn't enjoy the food, wasn't something that they ate very much at all. And after surgery, they can really enjoy cottage cheese, and it can be something that they really enjoy and can build extra protein into their diet by having it in different ways. So taste changes are definitely a common challenge, especially when a go-to food for you before surgery is just not something that is enjoyable after surgery. We need to find other things to fill that place, and also have patience and park it to the side. That's how I put it. Park it to the side, write it on a list to help you come back to it later. And this next common challenge is related to taste changes, but a little bit different. And it's food intolerances. And that's when foods don't necessarily settle well for you after having weight loss surgery. And a really common one is eggs, and I'll talk about eggs as an example. So you may have had eggs all the time, regularly before surgery. You could have eggs in any form, and it was something you had regularly and you love eggs. Post-surgery, it can be that eggs can not sit well for people. It's a very common one. And I'm going to go to some other examples. I mean, eggs is still a moist food, can be chewed really well and easily, and you would think that maybe scrambled eggs would be something that would settle well. But for some people, they don't. But I always say to people, if eggs in one form don't suit them, go and try eggs in another form, like poached or hard-boiled, because it's not clear why, but for some reason, eggs in different forms cannot sit well for different people. We don't know exactly why. But food intolerances, it's really around, it's around maybe more texture for people, and drier foods that maybe get stuck. And some foods just don't settle well for some people. We just don't know why. Drier foods, that's clear. Softer, moister foods are going to go down and settle better in your tummy. But some foods, even if the consistency is great, you've eaten in small bites, chewed well, eaten slowly, they still don't settle for some people. We don't know exactly why, but for most people, they will move out of that. Later on down the track, those foods will be okay for them. But it's a challenge because not only are you doing so many changes in your eating habits, in your life after surgery, we're changing the types of foods, and some of those really great foods that you're having pre-surgery aren't going to sit well and aren't sitting well for you. And it can just add to that extra change that you're experiencing. If you are in the weight loss phase after your bariatric surgery, well, listen up, as I have a wonderful resource you are going to love. And yes, it's free. It's called Supercharge Your Weight Loss Success Starter Kit. It's a 3-day mini course where I take you through the steps to supercharge your weight loss. You will become clear on what habits are taking you out of your weight loss zone and which are the key habits you personally need to foster to move back into where you want to be. Yes, to losing weight. Sound good? If yes, grab this free resource. The link is in the show notes. Next one does relate to food intolerances, and this common challenge can be a lactose intolerance to a degree. So it's not a true lactose intolerance. Some people can find in the first 6 months or a bit longer after having bariatric surgery that foods with higher levels of lactose, which is milk sugar, just don't settle well for them. They causes them some GI issues. It's not true lactose intolerance in the sense that often people, I call it, grow out of it. It doesn't last forever. As we process dairy foods, the lactose is decreased or lost in those foods. So foods such as cheese can often settle well for people, but yogurts and whole milk can still be an issue, and this is something that gets better with time. But an issue with lactose or not being able to tolerate or handle lactose as well is a very common thing to happen after weight loss surgery, and happens a bit more with some of the bypasses I have found over the years, some of the more significant bypasses, but doesn't mean it can't happen after a vertical sleeve gastrectomy. So if this is you, work through what dairy foods with lactose sit well for you and don't, and what amounts don't cause any issues, and just know that things do get better. When I'm working with clients that have this challenge, we do a very methodical step-by-step to establish what dairy foods we can get in our diet, because dairy foods are wonderful. They're wonderful sources of protein and calcium, and we want them to be part of the diet as much as we can. And we step by step go through what we can have, and then I outline the steps of how we over time challenge and increase the intake of lactose. So know that there is help and support you can get if this is a considerable struggle for you. So the next common challenge I want to talk about is not food-based. It's actually the emotional aspects after having weight loss surgery. And I've just written my notes as like grief, mourning food, loss of food, and mourning the experience of eating. And so while it's a really big banner, I'm putting it all together, it can be different for different people. It can come up as quite a surprise for many people after having their surgery. They are looking for relief on appetite, as we talked about in the beginning, thinking about food less, all of those things. And there can be a lovely part of those early days after having surgery, but what can also come up is mourning food and the role food played in their diet from emotional needs. And also when food plays a really big part in your social life and that experience of eating with other people, feeling part of a family, friendship group, and that can change considerably, especially in those early days after surgery. So there can be a lot of emotional challenges that come up for people on how to navigate life, social settings, and managing emotions that come up then where they maybe previously have met their emotional needs by eating. So that's a very common area I work with clients on, how to manage and step through this challenge and re-establish their relationship with food. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. Readjusting their relationship with food, and it's a step-by-step process. And if you listen to me talking on social media a lot and in here in my podcast, I say all the time there are a lot of changes that happen that first year, and these are really common challenges. So that emotional challenge of morning food and the experience of eating is a big one for many people. And the last common challenge I want to talk about today is compliance with multivitamins and medications. So taking medications and vitamins is not something solely after bariatric surgery, but often people will come into their bariatric journey not having to have regularly taken vitamins or even medications. And sometimes vitamins definitely for everyone, but sometimes also medications do get introduced post-surgery, even if it's just for a period. And a really common one are the proton pump inhibitors, which people often get sent home from hospital on. And that's to lower stomach acid production in your tummy, which helps the environment in your tummy to be less acidic and nicer for it to heal. And so compliance is taking regular vitamins and medications regularly. And that's another reason why getting a really regular eating schedule is so important, because when we have this routine and eating schedule in the day, it can really help anchor when is the best time to include your medications and your multivitamins. Routine really helps build habits. And one of the key habits after weight loss surgery we want to establish is taking your vitamins and minerals regularly. And if you need to take medications, taking them regularly. So to recap, the common challenges that can come up in the early days after bariatric surgery: low appetite and thirst, nausea, taste changes, food intolerances, a form of lactose intolerance, morning food and experience of eating, and also compliance with multivitamins and medications. So thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate your support. If you would like to share my podcast with anyone that you feel would find it of value, I would so love that. Please tag me when you share it, and I will give you a shout out in following podcasts. So thank you so much, and I really look forward to being back in your ears next week. Bye for now.